What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Talking About Baseball. Today is day 4 of the 12 Days of Christmas rankings, and today I will be ranking the first baseman. And I just want to say one more time, this is probably the last time I'm going to mention this on this series if you've watched every video. You should go back and watch the first 3 before you watch this one, and this series is fully credited to Giraffe Neck Mark, who is the originator of this series. But anyway, let's get into it with number 33, and that will be Matt Mervis of the Chicago Cubs. He was alright last year. He hit under 200 and looked pretty much terrible before getting sent down for the Cubs in mid-June. He never got called up again after they traded for Jeimer Candelario at the trade deadline. I don't think he'll end up being the Cubs starter at first base next year, but I do think that he'll be a solid bench bat for them, at least for next year, and could potentially be the starting first baseman in the next few years, as he's definitely very talented. He just has not shown at the major league level yet. At number 32, I have new Brewers first baseman Jake Bauers. They traded for Carlos Santana at the trade deadline, but he is now a free agent, and then they traded for Jake Bauers from the Yankees, who probably just had his best season yet. He's mainly played left field throughout his career, but he can play first base, and it appears that's what he's going to be playing for the Brewers. The Brewers are kind of going through a retool rebuild right now, but I do think that Jake Bauers could actually be a pretty solid hitter for them, and I think that he could easily hit about 20 home runs for them, although I just haven't really seen it so far throughout his career, and he's been a very bad hitter and obviously a terrible defender, and I just want to see him do better, and I think he definitely can, as I think the Brewers have a really good developmental system. At number 31, I have the Twins' Alex Kirilloff. He got injured last year, and first base was taken over by Donovan Solano. I think Solano is mainly just a lefty hitter, and Kirilloff will be the main guy against righties. And I do think that with his young age, Kirilloff can still be a really solid first baseman for the Twins. But I think if he does bad again this year, this will probably be his last chance. At number 30, I have recently DFA'd by the Brewers and new Pirate Rowdy Tellez. He has a lot of promise in my opinion, as just in 2022 he hit 35 home runs, but he's a terrible defender, and in 2023, he was absolutely horrific at the plate and ended up not playing for the Brewers by the end of the season. I think that Rowdy Tellez can still be a really solid hitter, and on this Pirates team, I don't really think they care if he's good or not. I think they just care if he's not absolutely terrible. At number 30, I have Athletics first baseman Ryan Noda. He looked pretty solid last year. He's mainly a big guy who takes a lot of walks because his batting average isn't that good, but his on-base percentage is amazing. I do think that he can build off of last year. He was almost an all-star for the Athletics, and I don't really think that he's the greatest first baseman ever. That's why he's ranked at number 29. But I think that if he's able to raise that batting average and hit some more home runs, he can be a really solid first baseman in the future. At number 28, I have current free agent Brandon Belt. I think that he could go to my Chicago Cubs, but he was with the Blue Jays last year and had a really solid season. He's coming off of a few years with the Giants where he's just been declining as he gets older and older, but he went to the Blue Jays last year to be their DH behind Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and he looked really solid. Obviously, he's only going to hit against righties as he's a lefty, but I think Brandon Belt could easily hit 20 home runs again for whatever team he signs with. At number 27, I have Jake Cronenworth of the Padres. He has not been very good the last few years. When he got traded to the Padres in his first year, he looked really solid along with 2021, but since then he's been pretty bad, and especially this last season, and now the Padres are looking to trade him, and he is at 27 because he pretty much has lost all of his power, and he is not in the Crone zone anymore. At number 26, and this pains me to say it as a former Cubs player, I have Chris Bryant of the Colorado Rockies. He has played less than half the games the Rockies had the last 2 years after they signed him to a massive deal where he's earning over $20 million a year to play less than half of the games, as I mentioned. Also, in those games he's played, he has been absolutely terrible at the plate, dealing with a ton of different injuries, mainly to his wrist and back, which was what was pretty much happening with the Cubs at the end of his contract with them. At number 25, I have Jose Abreu. This might be slightly low because he was dealing with an injury to start last year, and he looked absolutely horrific. It took him until June to hit his first home run, but then after that, he hit 17 from then on. I think if Abreu isn't dealing with injuries as much this year, he could be a really solid first baseman again, and he showed that in the playoffs where he was really good for an Astros team that was just one game away from making the World Series. At number 24, I have Marlins first baseman Josh Bell. He got traded there at the deadline from the Guardians after hitting terrible for the Guardians and looked pretty solid with the Marlins to end the year, and he accepted his player option of $16 million, which is a lot of money for him. But obviously the Marlins didn't really have a choice, and now Josh Bell will be their first baseman for this year. I don't think he's really terrible, but if the Marlins want to make the playoffs again, I don't really think Josh Bell is a great guy to have in your lineup and be one of the best hitters, because their offense is very weak. At number 23, I have Anthony Rizzo of the Yankees. He was on track to have one of his best seasons last year before dealing with a big concussion that made his stats much worse. I think that he could be a lot better, but also I feel like a concussion doesn't really last 3 months, and I feel like by the end of it, he was more just in his own head, and the Yankees medical staff deserves a lot of the blame for him, though, and I think that his concussion with him since he kept playing with it all season last year, could potentially still linger a little bit at times, which I think is pretty much what was happening by the end of the season last year. But I think Rizzo could be really solid, but after what he did last year, it's just not really looking very good for him. At number 22, I have free agent Carlos Santana. I mentioned that he was the first baseman for the Brewers. He walked off my Chicago Cubs near the end of the year to eliminate us from the playoffs, and I think that he's just a pretty solid hitter. He hit really low batting average-wise, but still drew a lot of walks as he's done his whole career and had a pretty solid on-base percentage, and he's still a pretty good power hitter overall too, but he's also really getting up there in age at 37 years old, and I think he'll mainly just be a platoon guy as like I said, he's just really old, and I don't know who he'll be starting at for first base. At number 21, I have a brand new Cincinnati Red, Jeimer Candelario. It's really interesting to me for him. He was really solid with the Nationals and Cubs last year, but the year before that with the Tigers, he was absolutely terrible. But in years before that with the Tigers, he was also doing really solid. So I don't really know how he'll do with the Reds. He's one of the biggest veterans on the team, even though he's not really all that old. So I think he will have to be a leader in Cincinnati, and I think he'll be able to do that. But with first base being a really solid position this year, I think that I'm going to have him at 21. At number 20, I have White Sox first baseman Andrew Vaughn. He's really one of the only promising hitters on that whole entire team. I think that Andrew Vaughn is really solid, but he hasn't really had a huge breakout season yet, and that's why I have him ranked at number 20, although I do think that he could get much better. At number 19, I have Spencer Torkelson of the Tigers. Torkelson had his kind of breakout season last year after looking absolutely terrible in 2022. In 2023, his average was still pretty bad, but he hit a lot of home runs, and I think that if he's able to raise that average even to 250 from 220, he will be a really solid hitter if he continues to hit that many home runs. At number 18, I have Nationals hitter Joey Meneses. I fully expected him to do very bad last year because Frank Schwindel of the Cubs was pretty much his player comparison, got called up after the Nationals completely sold at the deadline, and he hit amazing. But last year, he never had his big fall off, and he continued to hit amazing. And I think he'll continue to hit pretty solid, maybe not quite as good as he's now 33 years old, and he's also on the Nationals team that really isn't all that good. At number 17, I have Lamont Wade Jr. of the Giants. Lamont Wade Jr. is just a completely contact hitter, doesn't really bring a ton of power to the table, but he could easily hit 300 in the next couple of years if he has a really solid season. He's another guy who's in his low to mid-30s, but he's still a really solid hitter for the Giants. One of the best hitters in that lineup, which hasn't really been all that great the last few years. At number 16, I have Vinny Pasquantino of the Royals. Halfway through the season, he had a season-ending injury after looking really solid. In 2022, he got called up at the end of the year and also looked really good, but I think that 2024 will be really his breakout year coming off of injury. He didn't look great to start last year, and then obviously the injury stopped him. But I think that pretty soon Vinny Pasquantino can be a really solid hitter. I think he just needs to have a complete season with the Royals. And obviously, like I've said in the past few videos, the Royals look like they're going for it. They have a okay offense that's mainly around him, Freddie Fermin, Salvador Perez, and of course their star Bobby Witt Jr. And they just added pitchers like Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha to add to a rotation that looked really bad last year. Number 15, I have Royals first baseman Ty France. In 2022, he was an all-star first baseman for them and was their second best hitter behind J-Rod, but this year he completely fell off a cliff and was not nearly as good. He hit .250 and just was not himself. He's never been all that good of a defender, but I do think that he'll be able to bounce back this year, and that's why I have him ranked so high. At number 14, I have Orioles first baseman Ryan Mountcastle. He's just been a really solid hitter the last few years. I do think that he can do better and has not unlocked his full potential yet. And I think you could say the exact same thing. I think you could say the same thing for pretty much the entire Orioles team, as they're a very young roster, and even though they're so young, they just won 100 games last season, and I think they'll continue to get even better than that. At number 13, I have Red Sox first baseman Tristan Casas. He looked pretty alright to start the season last year, but he ended it absolutely on fire. He was one of the best rookie first basemen, if not the best rookie first baseman last year, and I think that he will be one of the best hitters in this Red Sox lineup for the next few years, after they have traded away stars like Mookie Betts and lost JD Martinez, and there's not really all that many people left from that 2018 World Series team, but Casas is the next generation of the Red Sox, and they've also kind of been going after a lot of big free agents, mainly Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and if they're able to land him, I think that will be a big pickup for them, and maybe be able to boost them into the playoffs in a very crowded AL East. At number 12, I have free agent first baseman Rhys Hoskins. It's not totally clear if he'll be playing first base after a big ACL tear in spring training ended his season completely, but in 2022 with the Phillies in their World Series run, he looked outstanding all season, as he has every season before then, and he turned it on in the playoffs, which I think would be really valuable to an up-and-coming young team that doesn't really have a ton of playoff experience, like my Chicago Cubs. I would love him in Chicago. But once again, like I said, I don't really know if he'll be playing first base. Could potentially just be a DH for any team that picks him up, because he has not played first base, because that knee could be bothering him, and I think that he could also just kind of split between first and DH. At number 11, I have Angels first baseman Brandon Drury. I think Drury was one of the only good hitters on the Angels for the whole season last year. Obviously, Shohei is the other one, but he got injured at the end of the year, and Trout was also injured for half of the year, but that's pretty much just the standard now. I think Brandon Drury is going to need to really do good next year if the Angels want to do anything, because their team is looking very unimpressive without Shohei now, and they're for some reason still trying to do good in a division that includes the World Series winner from last year, a team that hasn't missed out on the championship game in almost 10 years, and the Mariners, who have one of the best young hitters in baseball in Julio Rodriguez. And Brandon Drury is pretty much the star of this Angels offense, which does not even compare to stars like Corey Seager, obviously J-Rod, and guys like Kyle Tucker and Jose Altuve that are the stars of other teams in their division. At number 10, I have Nate Lowe of the Texas Rangers, as I was just talking about. He is somehow one of the worst hitters in their lineup. That's how good their team is. They're coming off of a World Series victory in a postseason where Nate Lowe was absolutely garbage. I can't even say it any less than that. He looked terrible throughout the playoffs, and I do think that was one of the reasons that it took the Rangers so long, because I don't think they really necessarily needed to go 7 games against the Astros. But I think that Nate Lowe can definitely rebound in the next few years. He still looked really good in the regular season, and I think that a breakout year from him is coming in the next 2 years. At number 9, I have Guardians first baseman Josh Naylor. He obviously has his brother Bo Naylor, who I just talked about in the last video. He's been highly talked about in trade talks after having a big breakout 2023 season, and obviously the Guardians just trade away anyone who's either remotely good on their team, because they spend absolutely no money unless it's on Jose Ramirez. Josh Naylor has been one of the best hitting first basemen last year, and I think that if he didn't get injured at the end of the season, he could have easily hit 30 to 35 homers. I do actually think that he will get traded, and obviously I just have to mention it again. I would love him on my Chicago Cubs. He's a great left-handed bat for any lineup that really needs a lefty. I think that Josh Naylor could even be a future 40 home run hitter if he could just really piece everything all together. At number 8, I have Diamondbacks first baseman Christian Walker. He's another guy like Nate Lowe who just looked absolutely awful in the playoffs last year. He was really bad throughout the whole playoffs, and he had to be one of the Diamondbacks' best hitters, and he just wasn't that throughout the playoffs. I think that he needs to do better if they want to make another World Series run and maybe even win it next year, but the Dodgers have reinforced a lot after they got swept by the D-backs, and I hope Christian Walker and the rest of that Diamondbacks team is ready for them. At number 7, I have Blue Jays first baseman Vladimir Guerrero Jr. He is coming off of another year where he hasn't really hit great, but he's just been really solid. I think everyone's still waiting for the year that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. hits, 40, 50 home runs, but he just really hasn't gotten there yet. Obviously, he did get there in 2021 with 48, but he has not been able to replicate that success. His ground ball rate has just been way too high the last few years, and even though he kind of figured it out getting the ball in the air the last few months, I think he just needs to pair that up for a whole season, and he will be much higher than number 7. At number 6, I have Mets first baseman Pete Alonso. The main reason he's this low is his batting average dropped a lot last year. It dropped almost 50 points from the year before, and even though he's still a huge power hitter with a ton of home runs, batting average is also a huge part, and if you're only going to hit 210, that's why he's definitely a little bit lower on this list, because hitting 200 with 45 home runs is pretty much just Kyle Schwarber, and Kyle Schwarber is not really a guy who I would be ranking in the top 5. At number 5, I have Rays first baseman Yandy Diaz. He's shown flashes of being really good with the Rays and even a little bit with the Guardians before he got traded to the Rays. Of course, while he was on the Guardians, they were the Indians. Don't even know if I'm allowed to say that anymore. But anyway, Yandy Diaz was an all-star last year and was just absolutely outstanding all year. He hit .320 with almost 30 home runs, and he just looked like one of the best first basemen in the league. He's not ranked higher, mainly because he's really only put it all together for one season so far, and I also don't know if he'll be able to do it again, because I personally think that the Rays are not going to be quite as good, but I've also thought that for the last 4 years, so you never really know with Tampa Bay. At number 4, I have Phillies first baseman Bryce Harper. It was announced that he is their full-time first baseman now, pretty much getting rid of Rhys Hoskins indefinitely out of Philadelphia. I think that Bryce Harper is still going to do fine at first base. Without his arm in right field, it kind of diminishes his value a little bit, but he's still an outstanding hitter, and the Phillies are going to have him for a very, very long time. He is going to be on that team for maybe even longer than 13 years as he's seeking a contract extension, and he's going to continue to lead this team to playoff after playoff berth, and I think in the time that he's under contract, will win a World Series with the Phillies. At number 3, I have Paul Goldschmidt. He's coming off of a 2022 MVP season, but he definitely was not at that level in 2023. The Cardinals had an absolutely terrible season in 2023. They finished last place in an NL Central Division, which is actually looking a lot better now after being the worst NL division by far. I think it still is, but not by far anymore. I think the Cardinals are now going to do much better. They still have 2 stars on offense with him and Nolan Arenado, and I think that if Paul Goldschmidt is able to rebound slightly, even though he still had a great season last year, if he's able to get closer to that 2022 MVP season, he will really help the Cardinals out. Nolan Arenado having kind of a down year also didn't help them at all, but I think him and Nolan Arenado could pair up again and just be really solid on this Cardinals team. At number 2, I have Braves first baseman Matt Olson. It might be controversial to have him at number 2 after he hit 54 home runs along with a really high batting average, which batting average has pretty much been his problem his whole career. He is still striking out a lot, but he was absolutely mashing baseballs last year and was a big help in bringing the Braves to the playoffs, but of course they got eliminated very early in the playoffs, much earlier than they should have been. I think that Matt Olson could easily find himself at number 1 because the player who is at number 1 is aging, and the guy who I'm talking about is Freddie Freeman. The second video in the row where a Dodger is at number 1, obviously the other one being Will Smith, and I think that Freddie Freeman is just an absolutely outstanding hitter. It's surprising to see a guy come in the top 3 of the MVP when he's not really a great defender, but Freddie Freeman having a season where he hit like this is outstanding. Another former MVP winner, he won it in 2020, which you might not count, but I still do. He had a great season that year, and I think that Freddie Freeman could easily win another MVP, even though he is so old. He hit well over 300 last year with almost 30 home runs, and he is still one of the premier hitters in the league, even after leaving Atlanta and getting older and older every year. That is the end of my 2024 first base rankings of the 4th day of 12 of the 12 days of Christmas. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you tomorrow with the 5th day, which is second baseman. Bye.